The casino floor went quiet the moment the little girl spoke. "I can beat you, mister." Every head at the table turned. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Even the dealer forgot to breathe. Nobody talked to Domenico Rizzo like that. Nobody looked him in the eye and challenged him. Not the rich men who owed him money. Not the politicians who came to his casino to lose quietly. Not even the bodyguards who stood behind his chair every single night. But the voice had not come from a rich man or a politician. It came from a 7-year-old girl in a bright yellow dress, standing beside a folding chair near the staff door, holding a half-eaten sandwich in one hand. Her name was Ginevra. She was small for her age, with dark curly hair that never stayed in its ribbon and eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. While the men at the table had been staring at their cards, worrying about how much they might lose, Ginevra had been quietly watching the numbers, the chips, and the way Domenico's fingers moved. She was not scared of him. She had simply noticed a pattern, the way she noticed patterns in everything, and she had said so out loud. Her mother, Carmela, dropped the tray she was carrying. Coffee cups clattered onto the marble floor, but she barely noticed. She rushed forward, her face pale. "I am so sorry, sir," she said quickly, pulling Ginevra by the shoulder. "She does not mean any harm. Please, forgive her. She is only a child. She does not know." "Carmela." Domenico's voice was calm, almost soft, though the whole room still felt frozen. He raised one hand, and the room understood the gesture meant silence. He looked at Ginevra properly for the first time, studying her the way he studied every person who dared to sit across from him at cards. Nobody in that casino had surprised him in years. He had built an empire from fear. Men who ran companies bowed their heads when he walked past. Rivals who once mocked him now avoided his name completely. He had grown used to people trembling, flattering, or pretending to admire him. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to be looked at without fear. And this small girl, half his height, was looking straight at him with nothing but calm curiosity. He almost laughed. Then he did laugh, a real laugh, the kind that surprised even his own men, because none of them had heard it in a long time. "You think you can beat me?" he said, leaning back in his chair. "At what, exactly?" Ginevra pointed to the cards on the table. "That game. You keep doing the same thing every third round. The man in the yellow tie always folds when you do that. You are not really taking a risk. You already know what will happen." The men around the table shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a heavy-set man with a yellow tie, turned faintly red. Domenico's eyebrows rose. He studied the table again, thinking back over his last several hands, and to his own quiet surprise, she was right. He had fallen into a habit without noticing it himself. "She is only guessing," Carmela said quickly, still gripping her daughter's shoulder. "Please, sir. We will leave now. I am sorry for the trouble." "Let her stay," Domenico said. Carmela froze. Nobody refused Domenico Rizzo, but nobody had ever expected him to want a child to stay at his card table either. She glanced at her daughter, torn between fear and helplessness, but Ginevra did not look worried at all. If anything, she looked interested, the way she looked at puzzles in her school workbook. Domenico gathered a small set of chips and arranged a simple version of the game. One that did not involve real money. One built only to test whether the girl truly understood what she claimed to understand. "If you are so clever," he said, "prove it. Solve this." Ginevra walked closer to the table, ignoring the tension around her, and studied the arrangement for a long moment. Then, calmly, she moved the pieces in an order nobody at the table expected. It was not the obvious choice. It was not the safe choice. But it worked. She had won. For the second time that night, the casino floor fell into stunned silence. Domenico stared at the table, then at the girl, and something shifted in his expression. Something none of his men had seen on his face before. Not anger, not suspicion. Something closer to wonder. "Impressive," he said quietly. He looked at Carmela, who still looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Then he made her an offer that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. "One more challenge," he said to Ginevra. "If you win this one too, I will grant your mother one favor. Anything within reason. Carmela opened her mouth to protest, to say her daughter was too young to be making deals with a man like him. But before she could speak, Ginevra had already nodded. She was thinking of the electric bill sitting unpaid on their kitchen table. She was thinking of her mother's tired eyes and the long shifts that left her barely able to stand by the end of the night. She did not fully understand who Domenico Rizzo was or what kind of man sat across from her. But she understood, in the simple way children understand important things, that her mother needed help. "All right," Ginevra said. "Show me." Domenico smiled, a small, unreadable smile, and reached for the cards again. None of them knew it yet, but that quiet moment at a casino table, between a feared man and a fearless child, was about to change all of their lives forever. If you are enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories like this one to life. Now let's continue. Domenico laid out the second challenge on the table, more carefully this time. It was harder than the first, built from a pattern he himself had once used to test new men before letting them work in his casino. He expected the girl to hesitate. He expected her to ask for help or to give up halfway, the way most adults did when the pressure grew too heavy. Ginevra did neither. She tilted her head, studied the pieces for almost a full minute without saying a word, and then slowly moved them into place. Took her 3 tries to adjust her plan, but on the 4th attempt, she solved it completely. The room stayed silent, but this time the silence felt different. It was not fear. It was disbelief. Domenico looked at the table, then at the small girl standing proudly beside it, arms crossed, waiting for him to admit she had won. "Well," he said at last, "it seems I owe your mother a favor." Carmela stepped forward, still shaken. "Sir, please, you do not have to." "I keep my word," Domenico said simply. He turned to Ginevra. "What does your mother want?" Every man at the table leaned in slightly, expecting the girl to ask for money, jewelry, or a new house. Children who grew up watching movies often asked for such things, and Domenico had already prepared himself to hear a request for something expensive. Instead, Ginevra looked up at him with the same calm, steady expression she had worn the entire night. "I want you to stop making my mom scared of you." The words landed heavier than any amount of money could have. Domenico's jaw tightened slightly. Behind him, his men shifted, unsure how to react to a request that could not be solved with cash or favors. Carmela's eyes filled with tears. She quickly tried to blink away. Domenico said nothing for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly. "All right," he said quietly. "I will try." Nobody in that casino, not even Domenico himself, fully understood what those simple words would set into motion. Over the following weeks, small things began to change. Carmela's shift schedule, once impossible and exhausting, became easier to manage. The manager who used to yell at her over minor mistakes suddenly stopped bothering her altogether. Her rent, somehow, arrived paid before she even opened the envelope. Her old car, which had been making a worrying noise for months, was returned from the mechanic fixed, with no bill attached. At first, Carmela thought she was simply having a stretch of good luck. But good luck did not usually happen this many times in a row, and she was not a woman who believed in coincidences. She noticed Domenico watching from a distance sometimes, standing near the entrance of the casino in his dark coat, saying nothing, simply observing the floor the way he always did. But his eyes lingered a little longer on her section than they used to. One evening, after her shift ended and the casino had grown quiet, she found him sitting alone in his office, a small chessboard set up in front of him, though no one was playing. "You have been helping me," she said, standing in the doorway. It was not a question. Domenico did not look up from the board. "I do not know what you mean. My schedule, my rent, my car." Her voice was steady, though her hands were not. "None of that happens by accident. Not around here." He finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "Perhaps you are simply having a good month." "Please," Carmela said, crossing her arms. "I have worked here for 3 years. I know how this place runs. Nothing happens without your permission. For a moment, Domenico looked almost amused by her persistence. Then he set down the piece he had been holding. Your daughter made a deal with me, he said simply. Carmela blinked. She is 7 years old. She should not be making deals with a man like you. Apparently, Domenico said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. She does. Carmela wanted to be angry. She wanted to march out of that office and forbid her daughter from ever wandering near his card table again. But something in his voice, something almost gentle beneath the usual coldness, made the anger fade into confusion instead. In the days that followed, Ginevra began visiting Domenico's office more often while her mother finished her shifts. He taught her new versions of the games he knew, though never for money, only for the simple pleasure of watching her think. She, in turn, teased him without fear, correcting his mistakes, laughing at his stern expressions, treating him the way no one else in his world dared to. Their bond grew easily, warmly, like something that had always been meant to happen. His feelings toward Carmela grew more slowly and far more carefully. She was nothing like the women who usually smiled at him because of his money. She barely smiled at him at all. She watched him with careful, guarded eyes, the way a person watches a fire they respect but do not yet trust. Domenico found, to his own quiet surprise, that he did not mind the wait. For the first time in many years, he had something worth being patient for. Weeks turned into months, and the casino staff began to notice a change in Domenico Rizzo that none of them could quite explain. He still ran his empire with the same sharp control. He still made grown men nervous with a single glance. But there were small differences now, things only the people who worked closest to him would catch. He smiled more, though only in certain corners of the building. He no longer stayed locked in his office until dawn every night. And most strangely of all, he had started leaving the floor early on the evenings when a certain waitress finished her shift. Rocco Silvani, his oldest friend and most trusted man, noticed it first. Rocco had stood beside Domenico for over 20 years, through wars with rival families, through betrayals, through the slow climb from a dangerous underworld into something that looked, from the outside, like a respectable business empire. He had seen Domenico angry, calculating, even cruel when necessary. He had never seen him like this. You are staring again, Rocco said one evening, watching Domenico's eyes follow Carmela across the casino floor as she carried a tray of drinks. I am watching the floor, Domenico said. It is my job. Your job does not usually make you forget what you were saying mid-sentence. Domenico said nothing, which Rocco took as confirmation enough. Carmela, for her part, remained careful. She had grown up learning not to trust powerful men easily, and Domenico Rizzo was the most powerful man she had ever known. She appreciated his help, more than she could easily admit, but appreciation and trust were not the same thing. She kept her guard raised, even as small moments between them began to soften her resolve. One night, after closing, she found her old car would not start in the casino parking lot. She stood beside it in the cold, trying and failing to make the engine turn over, until a familiar dark coat appeared beside her. Let me take a look, Domenico said. You do not need to trouble yourself, she replied, though her fingers were already numb from the cold. He crouched down anyway, checking under the hood with the ease of a man who had once fixed cars long before he owned casinos. Within a few minutes, the engine coughed back to life. There, he said, straightening up and wiping his hands. It was only a loose wire. Carmela stared at him, unsure what to say. Powerful men did not usually kneel on cold pavement to fix an old waitress's car. Why do you keep doing this? She asked quietly. The schedule, the bills. Now this. Domenico considered his answer carefully before speaking. Because your daughter asked me to make you less afraid of me. I am trying. You could have simply left us alone. That would have made me less afraid too. Perhaps, he admitted. But I did not want to leave you alone. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, standing there in the cold, she saw something in him that had nothing to do with fear or power, something almost lonely, something she recognized because she had felt it herself for a very long time. She did not know what to do with that feeling. so she simply thanked him and drove home, though she found herself thinking about his words long after she had gone to bed. Meanwhile, trouble was quietly growing inside the walls of Domenico's own casino. Fabio Serra, the floor manager who had worked under Domenico for nearly a decade, had begun making choices no one else noticed. Small adjustments to the nightly counts. Numbers that did not quite add up if anyone bothered to check twice. Fabio had always been trusted completely, which made it easy for him to move carefully, taking only enough to avoid suspicion, hiding the rest behind clever paperwork. He believed himself too clever to be caught. He had not accounted for a quiet 7-year-old girl who sat in the corner of the staff room some evenings, drawing pictures while she waited for her mother, watching people the way she watched everything else, without anyone realizing she was paying attention at all. Ginevra liked to draw the people she saw at the casino. She was not very good at drawing faces, but she was excellent at remembering small details, the kind of details most adults overlooked completely. She noticed which employees came in through the back door at strange hours. She noticed which drawers certain people opened when they thought no one was looking. She drew these things in her notebook the way other children might draw flowers or animals, simply because she found them interesting. She had no idea that her quiet observations were slowly building a picture that would eventually help uncover something far more serious than she could imagine. Domenico, unaware of the threat growing under his own roof, found himself thinking more and more about the woman who refused to be impressed by his wealth and the daughter who had somehow taught him how to laugh again. He did not yet know how much both of their lives were about to change. By the time autumn arrived, Ginevra had become a familiar sight around the casino. Staff members greeted her by name. The chefs saved her small treats from the kitchen. Even the most serious of Domenico's men had grown fond of the little girl who wandered the halls with her notebook, sketching whatever caught her attention. Domenico looked forward to their evenings together more than he liked to admit. She teased him about the way he always wore the same dark coat. She corrected him when he cheated slightly at their games, catching him every single time. She asked him blunt questions that no adult would dare ask, like why he never smiled at anyone except her and her mother, or why his office was always so quiet and empty. "Because most people do not interest me," he told her once. "You should get more interesting friends," she said simply, not even looking up from her drawing. He laughed at that, a real laugh, the kind that still surprised his own staff whenever they heard it. His feelings for Carmela, meanwhile, continued to grow slowly and carefully, the way something grows when it is being handled with great respect. He never pushed her. He never used his wealth or his power to try to win her over, the way other men might have. He simply stayed near, steady and patient, letting her come to trust him at whatever pace felt safe to her. Carmela noticed the change in herself too, though she resisted naming it for a long time. She noticed how her shoulders relaxed slightly whenever he entered the room. She noticed how she found herself glancing toward his office door more often than she used to. She told herself it was only gratitude, only the natural result of a man helping her through a difficult year. But late at night, lying awake after long shifts, she knew it had become something more than gratitude, even if she was not ready to say so out loud. One evening, Ginevra came to Domenico's office holding her notebook a little tighter than usual. "I want to show you something," she said, climbing onto the chair across from his desk. She flipped through pages of drawings, past sketches of chandeliers, card tables, and staff members she had grown used to seeing. Then she stopped on a page near the back and turned it toward him. It was a rough drawing of a man carrying a bag through the back door of the casino, late at night, based on details she had noticed over several weeks. Beside the drawing, in her careful, childish handwriting, she had written down times and dates, the way she had seen numbers written in her mother's old notebooks. Domenico studied the drawing for a long moment. His expression grew serious in a way Ginevra had never seen before. "Where did you see this?" he asked. "By the kitchen door. He comes at the same time almost every week, after the second shift ends. He always looks over his shoulder first." Domenico recognized the figure in the drawing immediately, even through a child's simple lines. It was Fabio Serra, a man he had trusted for years, a man who had access to nearly every part of his business. He said nothing to Ginevra about his suspicions, not wanting to frighten her. But that night, after she had gone home with her mother, he called Rocco into his office and laid the notebook open on the desk between them. "Look at this," he said quietly. Rocco studied the drawing, then the notes beside it, his expression darkening as he recognized the pattern the girl had unknowingly uncovered. "She noticed this without anyone telling her to look," Rocco said, almost in disbelief. "She notices everything," Domenico replied. "We have been careless. Fabio has had access to too much for too long." They spent the following days quietly reviewing records, cross-checking numbers Fabio had handled personally, and comparing them against Ginevra's simple but accurate notes. What they found was worse than either of them expected. Fabio had not been acting alone. Someone above him, someone with far more dangerous connections, had been using him to slowly drain money from the casino for months, preparing for something bigger than simple theft. Domenico realized, with growing unease, that the deeper this investigation went, the more dangerous it might become for everyone connected to him, including the two people who had somehow become the most important part of his life. He did not yet tell Carmela what he had discovered. He wanted to handle the threat quietly, to protect her and her daughter from the darker world he still carried with him, even as he tried harder than ever to leave that world behind. But secrets, especially dangerous ones, rarely stayed hidden for long in a place like his casino. Carmela had always known, in the quiet corner of her mind she tried not to think about, that Domenico Rizzo was not simply a wealthy businessman. Everyone who worked at the casino whispered stories about him, stories about the years before the business became respectable, about the kind of man he had been and, some said, still was beneath the surface. She had chosen not to ask questions, telling herself it was not her business, that she only needed the job to support her daughter. But choosing not to ask questions became much harder the night she overheard something she was never meant to hear. She had stayed late finishing paperwork near Domenico's office when she heard raised voices through the partly closed door. Rocco's voice, low and urgent, mentioned names she did not recognize, talk of debts, of old rivals, of dangerous men who did not forgive easily. Then she heard Domenico's voice, calm as always, giving instructions in a tone that left no room for argument. The tone of a man clearly used to being obeyed without question in matters far more serious than casino business. Carmela stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding, pieces falling into place all at once. The stories were not exaggerations. The rumors were not old history he had left behind. Whatever Domenico Rizzo truly was, it was not simply a casino owner who had grown fond of her daughter. She left before either man noticed her, driving home with shaking hands, her mind racing through every kind moment they had shared, wondering how much of it had been real and how much of it had simply been the careful control of a dangerous man. The next day, she confronted him directly, unable to carry the fear alone any longer. "Tell me the truth," she said, standing in his office doorway, arms crossed tightly against her chest. "All of it. No more careful words." Domenico set down the papers he had been reading and studied her for a long moment. He had known this conversation would come eventually. He had simply hoped for more time. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I would rather stand." He nodded, accepting that, and then he told her everything. He told her about the years before the casino, about the choices he had made as a much younger man, choices born from desperation and survival rather than cruelty, though the world rarely made room for that distinction. He told her about the slow, difficult path toward building something legitimate, about the enemies from his past who still occasionally resurfaced, about the current investigation into Fabio Serra and the danger it might still bring. He did not soften the truth to protect himself. He gave her every uncomfortable detail, because he understood that half-truths would only make the fear worse. Carmela listened in silence, her chest tight with a mixture of anger, fear, and something far more complicated underneath. "I do not want my daughter growing up around this," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Around danger, around men who settle problems the way you clearly have. I have spent every day since she was born trying to keep her safe." "I understand," Domenico said quietly. "Do you?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Because it does not feel like understanding." It feels like I let a wolf into my daughter's life without realizing it. The words landed hard, and for a moment, Domenico said nothing at all, absorbing them the way a man absorbs a truth he cannot argue against. You are right to be afraid, he said finally. I will not pretend otherwise, but I will not force you to stay near me, and I will not force you to accept a world you do not want for your daughter. If you wish to leave, I will not stop you. I will simply make sure you are both protected, no matter what you decide. Carmela stared at him, surprised by the answer. She had expected excuses or perhaps quiet manipulation, the kind powerful men often used to keep people close. Instead, he was offering her something she had not expected at all. Freedom to choose. Why would you let us go so easily? She asked. After everything you have done to help us? Because love that traps someone is not love at all, he said simply. It is only another kind of cage. I have built enough cages in my life. I do not want to build one for you. The word love hung between them, unspoken until that moment, and Carmela felt her carefully guarded heart tremble under its weight. She did not answer him that night. She went home confused, frightened, and unable to sleep, turning his words over again and again in her mind. Ginevra, sensing her mother's unease over the following days, asked simple, direct questions the way only children could. Do you like him? She asked one evening, while helping set the table for dinner. Carmela paused, unsure how to answer honestly. It is complicated, sweetheart. He is not scary, Ginevra said thoughtfully. Not to me. He lets me win sometimes, even though he thinks I do not notice. Carmela almost smiled despite herself. You notice everything. I know, Ginevra said simply, returning to setting the table, as though the matter were already settled in her own mind, even if her mother's heart was still catching up. Neither of them yet knew how soon that choice would be forced upon them, in a far more dangerous way than either could have imagined. The investigation into Fabio Serra moved quickly once Domenico and Rocco understood the true size of the problem. Fabio had not been stealing simply for himself. He had been working for a rival named Emil Dragunov, a man who had wanted a foothold inside Domenico's casino for years and had finally found a weak point through a trusted employee willing to betray him for the right price. When Fabio realized the investigation was closing in on him, he panicked. A cornered man rarely makes careful decisions, and Fabio, desperate to avoid Domenico's anger, reached out to Dragunov for help escaping the consequences of his own greed. Dragunov, however, cared little for Fabio's safety. He saw an opportunity instead, a chance to strike directly at the one weakness he had recently discovered in the feared Domenico Rizzo. Not the casino, not the money, the waitress and her daughter. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind that made the danger feel even more shocking because nothing about it seemed unusual at first. Carmela had just finished her shift and was walking to her car with Ginevra beside her, the girl chatting happily about a puzzle she had solved earlier that day. Neither of them noticed the black car parked at the edge of the lot until it was far too late. Two men stepped out, moving quickly, clearly expecting no resistance from a tired waitress and a small child. Carmela pushed Ginevra behind her instinctively, her heart pounding, her mind racing for any way to protect her daughter. But before the men could reach them, headlights flooded the parking lot as several cars arrived at once, tires screeching against the pavement. Rocco was out of the first car before it had fully stopped, followed closely by several of Domenico's most trusted men. Domenico himself emerged last, his expression colder and more dangerous than Carmela had ever seen it. The two attackers, realizing they were now outnumbered and exposed, hesitated just long enough for Domenico's men to close the distance. What followed was fast and controlled, over almost before Carmela could fully process what was happening. The attackers were subdued and disarmed without gunfire, without the chaos she had feared, though her hands still shook uncontrollably as she pulled Ginevra tightly against her. Domenico crossed the lot in a few long strides, kneeling down to check on both of them, his usual calm control cracking slightly at the edges. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tighter than Carmela had ever heard it. "We are fine," she managed, though her voice trembled. "How did you know?" I have had eyes on you both since the day this investigation began, he admitted. I told myself it was only caution. Tonight it was necessary. Ginevra, surprisingly calm despite everything, peeked out from behind her mother. You came to save us. I will always come, Domenico said quietly, and something in his voice made it clear the promise was not a small one. In the days that followed, the full truth came out. Fabio confessed everything once he understood that Dragunov had abandoned him the moment things went wrong. The stolen money was traced, the connections to Dragunov's organization exposed, and Domenico, working carefully within the boundaries of his newly legitimate world, ensured that both men faced consequences severe enough to end the threat permanently, without pulling Carmela or Ginevra any further into danger. Fabio lost everything he had built, his position, his reputation, his freedom to walk through the world without consequence. Dragunov, exposed and weakened, retreated from the city entirely, unwilling to risk further conflict with a man who had just proven exactly how far he would go to protect what mattered most to him. The casino returned to its usual rhythm within weeks, the danger fading into memory the way frightening things often do once they are safely behind you. But something had shifted permanently between Domenico and Carmela, something neither of them could pretend away any longer. She had seen him at his most dangerous, controlled and fierce, protecting her and her daughter without hesitation. And instead of feeling afraid, she had felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, completely safe. A few evenings later, she found him standing quietly near the casino entrance, watching the doors the way he always did, though his shoulders seemed lighter now that the threat had passed. Thank you, she said, standing beside him, for everything. You do not need to thank me, he said. I told you I would protect you both. I meant it. I know, she said softly. I believe you now. He turned to look at her properly, searching her face for any remaining trace of the fear that had lived there for so long. He found something different instead, something warmer, something that had grown slowly over many months without either of them fully admitting it out loud. Neither of them said the word love that night, but standing together in the quiet casino lobby, both of them understood, without needing to say it, that everything between them had already changed. Months passed, and the casino that had once felt cold and businesslike to Carmela now felt, strangely, like a second home. She still worked her regular shifts, though her days had grown far gentler than they used to be. She still wore her uniform and carried her tray with the same quiet pride she always had. But something about the way she moved through the building now was different. She no longer felt like a woman surviving. She felt like a woman who belonged. Ginevra, now 8 years old, had become something of a small legend among the staff. The chefs still saved her treats. The dealers still let her watch their games, though carefully now, aware that she noticed absolutely everything. Domenico's office had become her second classroom, filled with chess pieces, drawing notebooks, and the quiet laughter of a man who had once believed he had no room left in his life for anything soft. He had changed slowly and completely, in ways his oldest friends still found remarkable. Rocco often joked that the most feared man in the city had been defeated, not by a rival family or a dangerous enemy, but by a 7-year-old girl with a half-eaten sandwich and an unshakable sense of fairness. Domenico did not argue with the joke. He knew it was true. One evening, after the casino floor had quieted and most of the guests had gone home, Domenico asked Carmela to meet him in the same spot where everything between them had truly begun, the card table near the staff entrance where Ginevra had once looked up at him without fear and changed the course of all their lives. Carmela arrived, curious, and found the table set differently than she remembered. Instead of chips and cards, there was a single small box resting on the green felt, and Domenico standing beside it, looking, for the first time since she had known him, genuinely nervous. You once asked me why I kept helping you, he said quietly. I told you it began because of a deal your daughter made with me. That was true. But it stopped being about a deal a very long time ago. Carmela's breath caught in her throat. I have spent my whole life being feared, he continued. People bow their heads when I walk past. They flatter me because of my money, my power, the reputation I built out of necessity. None of it ever meant anything to me until the night your daughter looked at me like none of that mattered at all. And then you did the same thing, every single day since, without even trying. He opened the small box, revealing a simple, elegant ring inside, nothing showy or extravagant, chosen with the same quiet care he had shown her for months. "Marry me," he said simply. Carmela stared at him, her heart pounding, 100 emotions rushing through her all at once. "What happens if I say no?" Domenico did not hesitate. "Then I will spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve a yes, however long that takes." Before Carmela could find the words to answer, a small voice interrupted from the doorway, where Ginevra had been quietly watching the entire moment unfold, notebook tucked under her arm as always. "Just say yes, Mom," she said, rolling her eyes with the confidence only a child could manage in such a serious moment. "He has been waiting forever." Carmela let out a surprised laugh, the tension in her chest breaking apart into something warm and light. She looked at Domenico, at the man who had once been nothing but a frightening name whispered through the casino halls, now standing before her with nervous hope in his eyes, holding a small ring and an entire future in his open hands. "Yes," she said softly, then laughed again, brighter this time. "Yes." Ginevra cheered from the doorway, running forward to hug them both at once, and for a moment, the three of them stood together in the quiet casino, wrapped in a kind of happiness none of them had expected to find in a place built on money and danger. Domenico Rizzo, the most feared man in the city, had once believed that power and control were the only things worth having in life. He learned, in the end, that the greatest thing he ever won was not a card game, not a business deal, and not even the empire he had spent decades building. It was a woman who loved him without needing his power, and a daughter who had never once been afraid of him, only fair enough to see the man beneath the reputation. Right from the very first night she looked up and said, without a trace of fear in her voice, "I can beat you, mister." And in the end, she had been right about far more than just a card game. Thank you so much for watching until the end of this story. If it touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us what you loved most. We would love to have you back for more heartfelt, mature romance stories very soon. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love.